Home Trails podcast presented by me, Ultrarunning Sam. Now, this podcast is part of the Home Trails media entity that encompasses our Home Trails documentaries. You may have seen them on YouTube, so where we interview famous ultra runners from around the world and in the UK at the moment. We film them on the trail and in the home, obviously, Home Trails. Get those insights into their training, big races they've done, and then just their background information. Try and dig a bit deeper into what motivates them to go and do these amazing things that they do. Also, part of Home Trails is new for this year is our live podcast coming from big races. You may have seen us at the Spine Race in January. We were there doing our thing all week. Later on in the summer, we will be at the Lap in the Lake District, and then keep your eyes peeled for other races where we'll be popping up and doing media coverage for some big races, hopefully. So, obviously, we have a podcast now, so we'll keep doing this every week. Keep churning out the podcasts with famous runners and people in the industry, anyone that we can get on that we feel that you might be interested in related to trail running and ultra running. So on with our guest. Okay, folks, welcome to the Home Trails podcast. Now, this is an episode that I've been really looking forward to recording. So on today's podcast, we have JB Benna. So you may be familiar with his name. So JB is a documentary filmmaker and ultra runner himself, and he is credited with some great ultra running films. But the one that probably all of us know and know really well is Unbreakable. So this was the epic film that he made back in 2010, came out in 2011. So it was 2010's Western States battle between those four runners. So obviously Killian was there for the first time. Hal Kerner, Jeff Rose, and Anton having that battle to win Western States, and that film that came out of that iconic film is what we're going to talk to JB about. Also, sadly, the thing that sort of set this off, although I've wanted to talk to him about the film for a long time anyway, the thing that sort of got me in touch with him to finally try and arrange a podcast was that obviously we all heard the news that there was going to be an Unbreakable 2 being filmed at this year's Western Stage, which is obviously, as a recording today, is only like a couple of weekends away. Not this weekend, the weekends coming afterwards. So we're going to talk to him about that, find out what happened with that. I know some of the high profile runners dropped out, and maybe they sort of lost a bit of funding through Hoka. So we'll find out exactly what happened with that, but we'll also sort of dive into JB and his history in running, and talk about the probably the most iconic, one of the most iconic films in ultra running. So we'll catch up with him shortly. Okay, welcome to the Home Trails podcast, JB Benna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sam.
It's no problem. So I'm glad that we've made this happen. So this is something that that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and wasn't sure about whether you would come on to my little run of the mill podcast with a few thousand listeners.
I appreciate that there's still interest after all these years. So I thank you for reaching out and for your interest. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, there definitely is interest in Unbreakable. So what I sort of said before we started recording was that um I sort of felt like I wanted to get in touch with you to do with when the announcement was made that possibly Unbreakable 2 was happening. So this was sort of spurring the conversation that we're having today. But obviously we're not here to talk just about Unbreakable, just about Unbreakable 2. I want to, for my listeners who know who you are, undoubtedly, because I've referenced Unbreakable over the years so many times in reference to Western States and everything. So people know who you are, but so for people that sort of don't know your background and everything, we'll start with the superhero question. Now, I only gave you about 30 seconds warning on this, so don't worry about the detail. But obviously, all superheroes have an origin story. So what is your superhero origin story, JP?
I live in the Reno Lake Tahoe area in the California, Nevada border right here in the United States. Grew up in this area. My parents were pretty outdoorsy. They kind of grew up in the, camper van hippie revolution era. So they took us camping a lot when we were kids, backpacking, um, skiing all the time. And I live probably about 35 minutes away from the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a 2,700-mile trail that goes from Mexico to Canada. And as a child, I used to hike on that a lot with my family, and it kind of just, I don't know, it created a really interesting, sense of adventure, just like standing on that trail and looking one way and think, if I keep going this way, I can go all the way to Mexico, and if I turn around and go that way, I can go all the way to Canada. And so, when I was 21 years old, I decided that I was going to actually attempt to hike the entire trail with a few of
Wow.
my friends. And at the time, I was also, I guess, into film production. I got into that in high school, filming skateboarding, snowboarding, all sorts of adventure sports, and trying to also turn those into a little bit more of story driven, emotional, not just just thrill and highlight videos, but more, kind of having a little story and some emotion, whether that was musically driven or otherwise. And so I did that through high school, applied to film school, ended up getting into USC Film School down in Southern California, went down there, was studying there. And then that was the time between my junior and senior year that I decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So I actually went in and talked to my professors. I said, hey, I'm going to miss, well, I thought I was going to miss, a month of school, because I thought it was going to take us about 4 months to do it. But I am going to make this documentary along the way, and we're going to hike the entire Pacific Crest Trail. So ended up doing that. Honestly, didn't know anything. I mean, I'm honestly surprised I survived that. I didn't know anything about nutrition. I didn't know anything. I mean, I had backpacked, but the longest I had backpacked before was like 20 miles, and that was a period. And our very first day on the trail was a 20-mile day. And then, we ramped that up. And by the end, we were doing 50-mile days and like
Wow.
40-mile days. And so anyway, it was just like this kind of baptism by fire in a way. We just kind of jumped into the deep end and just kind of went for it. And, we had made some mistakes, got sick, got lost, got dehydrated, ran out of water, drinking mud, all sorts of weird things. But anyway, we survived the trail, and so I had all that footage from the trail. And then one of my friends that I hiked with, his cousin was a big ultra runner out of Bishop, California. It's the Eastern Sierras, and he kind of came and met us during the trail. And actually, we encountered quite a few ultra runners during our hike. There was, there's several races that occur on the Pacific Crest Trail. There's the Angeles Crest 100. The Western States 100 actually crosses the Pacific Crest Trail. There's a Cascade Crest, which is up in Oregon. And so we ran into a bunch of runners during this experience, and they shared food with us, which was amazing. And it was funny. We were like in the middle of hiking this long distance, but I was still like looking at these guys like they were absolutely crazy. I was like, there was no way. Like I can walk 30, 40 miles in a day, but I'm like running that far. That's absolutely insane. But I got back from the trail. One of my buddies that I hiked with ended up getting into ultra running after that. And he convinced me, he's like, hey, you know what, if you just, you can hike 40, 50 miles a day. If you just like hike hard and then mix in running on the flats and the downs, you could probably do an ultra. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And so just started training for it. My wife was a little bit of a runner. She ran track in high school, and she was doing like some 5Ks and 10Ks, just like road stuff. And so I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just kind of got out, started training, and then showed up at my first ever race was a 50K, which was, I just was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm not going to start, with the traditional 5K, 10K, work your way up. I'm just going to kind of jump off into the deep end. So I just started with my first race with the 50K, and ended up actually doing well. I think I finished under 5 hours, and ended up beating several of my friends who already had been doing it for a while. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that was kind of like a natural experience. And at the same time, like my wife had showed up to support me at that event. And I don't know if Chrissy Mail, she's kind of a legend in the
Mhm.
sport. Early on, she was just getting started. She had convinced my wife kind of on the spur of the moment to run the 30K. And my wife ended up, I think, winning her age group. And we both kind of just fell in love with the sport that day. And just kind of, again, dove in head first, I decided to like make a film about David Horton, who was running the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yes.
That film was called The Runner. kind of integrated some of my footage that I had shot during my Pacific Crest Trail hike. And so that was kind of where the worlds of, you know, long distance hiking, ultra running, and filmmaking all kind of collided into one thing. And yeah, and then from there I was kind of off to the races after I made that film. Got, you know, then some other companies like the North Face got in touch with me and they wanted me to make a film about Dean Karnazes for his 50 marathons, 50 states, 50 days. That was a several-year project. And then yeah, a few other small films in there that I produced. And then unfortunately, Ultramarathon Man was kind of it didn't ever like recoup its cost. So I was in the negative on that. And so my wife and I were heavily invested into the ultra running, like the actual, you know, the running part of ultra running. But when the opportunity to make Unbreakable came along, she said we weren't going to make any more films because we had lost so much money on the other film. But I looked at her and I said, I think this is going to work. Like these guys, like this is the movie I want to see. I've always you know, I don't know if you're speaking of superheroes, you know, when you're a kid, I'm sure you remember those superhero movies where, or I mean, cartoons where, you know, all the best superheroes would come together at one, you know,
Yeah.
to fight
The
evil. And
Avengers.
I always thought that was really cool. Like Spider-Man and Superman, and everyone's just like coming together. I was like, this is like Unbreakable. Like all these superheroes are coming together. They're all going to attempt to run this race. And so she said, well, if you do the majority of the work yourself and we keep the budget like super low instead of like paying everyone to do this, I'll agree to do it. And so it was kind of a last minute decision. I think we had decided only about a month ahead. And so we had to pull together the crew and yeah, brought everyone together. And then that was the birth of Unbreakable. And that kind of went from there. So yeah, so I don't know if that's too long of a definition, but basically just all of my passions kind of came together after years of experience and then all kind of culminated in making of Unbreakable. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Just sort of going back to your own ultra running then. So you know you did pretty well, didn't you, during your racing years? You're no slouch, were you? Did you set an FKT on the Tahoe rim? Was that back in
yeah,
2013?
yeah, you know, and that's kind of that's the other thing. Like when I first got into ultra running, I was like reading these books about these guys running 6 minute miles, and I was like, there is no way I could ever do that. You know, I was happy to be like 11, 10 minute miler guy. And but you know, just over the years, you know, we kept increasing our nutrition, understanding of nutrition, increasing our training. Actually started, this was kind of, you know, in the Scott Jurek era, but Scott Jurek was kind of a friend of ours, but he started coaching us to do our first 100 miler, my wife and I. And yeah, we kind of went from like these, you know, back of the pack runners to, you know, I would consider myself like a successful regional runner. Like I wasn't competing on the national level, but my wife, she actually was Hoka's first North American female athlete.
Wow.
She competed in podiumed in China. She went to the Canary Islands. She did a lot of big races. She still holds the course record of the Zion 100.
Wow.
Which was like 10 years ago that she did that. So it's pretty impressive that still stands. But yeah, she actually went more, you know, international, but yeah, I'd say I did okay. You know, I'd win regional races and local races. But you know, I think what caught my eye after Unbreakable, I made another film called The Long Haul about Mike Wolf and Hal Kerner's attempt of the John Muir Trail record.
Mm.
And that really inspired me, that just seeing them go through that. And I kind of just realized that I had this interesting intersection between my backpacking and ultralight hiking experience mixed with ultra running mindset. And so I'm like, I'm going to try to break the record on the Tahoe Rim Trail for the unsupported record, which where you carry all your own stuff. And no one supports you. Killian had the record for the supported, but I think at the time the record for the unsupported was like 64 hours or something like that. It's 174 miles. But yeah, I went out there in October of 2013 and just dug deep, kind of, you know, used my ultralight hiking experience to, you know, minimize the amount of gear and food and items I was carrying. And I beat the record in, you know, 58 hours. And that stood for about 2 years. And then some other gentleman came along and broke it after a few attempts. And then another guy, you know, FKTs are constantly being improved.
They're
But
made to be broken, aren't they?
yeah, it's been improved, I think, twice since then. But but yeah,
Right.
it was a good accomplishment for me to just kind of go out there and kind of put that uh, skill to the test. Yeah, so I my ultra running was hit and miss. I was never really super good, I'd say, at the 100-mile distance. My record on that was like 19 hours. But the shorter, I think my sweet spot was really like about half marathon to 50K. I could really crank on that distance. But I'm actually like 6'4". I don't know, so about almost like 2 meters,
Wow.
or what is that? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, we work in
Um,
as well. We work in feet and
okay,
inches. Yeah.
okay, yeah, but
Well,
so
I'm only 5'8". I'm little.
yeah, so I'm very fast on the downhills because I weigh nearly 200 pounds, even when I'm slim. I'm in the Clydesdale division or whatever. But when it's a ton of climbing, a ton of heat, I suffer pretty heavily. So yeah,
Yeah, so you're a dyed in the wall. Um, you've served your time as an ultra runner. So it's for anyone to make that film that you were the ideal person to make that film. But um, I wanted something you said just sort of caught my interest. So you were talking about how you were doing sort of filmmaking in sort of skate and snowboarding, and that's one of the things that I kind of recognized with Unbreakable is that I grew up. So before I was an ultra runner, I spent all of my sort of teenage years and early 20s, all of my 20s, snowboarding. So I was an early adopter. So I think the first snowboarding holiday I went on was in like 1996, the winter of 96. So at that point, there was there were so few snowboarders that you would wave to the other snowboarders on the mountain because there was hardly
yeah,
any
yeah,
hardly any others around. But I used to be obsessed with, as all of our mates were, with all of the snowboarding films at the time. So it would be like the TB series. Do you remember the T?
right.
Is
Oh
it
yeah,
totally bored, wasn't it? But TB1
yeah,
through five
yeah.
and stuff. So and the soundtracks that went with those
Mm-hmm.
films. So for me, watching Unbreakable, it felt like almost like because obviously I watched it years later. So I got into ultra running in sort of like probably 2012, 2013, something like that. And then years later, watching Unbreakable, it felt like going back to the 90s, even though obviously it wasn't filmed in the 90s, but it felt like a 90s kind of homage to snowboarding films. Was that something that was I don't know if it was intentional, or is that just something the way that your style of filmmaking sort of came out? Was that conscious?
I would say conscious, but definitely, yeah, I was influenced by those same types of films. Those films sometimes would have a little bit of story, and in particular, and this was actually right around the time that Unbreakable came out. There was that Art of Flight movie with uh, oh geez, now I'm blanking. He's the best snowboarder in the world. The Yeah, anyway, it was amazing film, but they started to kind of like work some like story elements into it about like they're trying to like do this crazy descent in South America, and they're helicoptering in and they're running out of fuel, and like they have to like swim across this thing in order to like get out of there in time before they run out of fuel in the helicopter. And then they actually were using some similar like M83 music in that. And so that was right around the exact same time that I was making Unbreakable. And yeah, I think there's just something, there's some heartstrings and some emotion that I think we all experience in these events. You dig deep. There's moments where you feel on top of the world and you're hooting and hollering, and then there's moments where you're just really suffering and down. And I'm like, how can I use the music to kind of like make the hair on the back of your neck stand up and like kind of like bring a tear to your eye, or just like make you like try to feel those highs and lows. And that's kind of something that, yeah, I definitely took from both skate and snowboard films, but also, and I would say this is a difference in the way that I made films was, I went to USC Film School, and their approach was so much more about storytelling than about like visuals. And I will tell you, like, I mean, obviously at the time, like there was no such thing as drones. There was no gimbal stabilizers. The camera I was carrying was like massive. I mean, we're not talking about little like, micro gimbal cameras that they have these days. It weighed probably 15 or 20 pounds. I
Wow.
had tape, it had actual like physical tape. So I was switching tapes while I was running, and I ran 30 miles that day. As a matter of fact, that scene in Unbreakable where Killian passes them going down in the canyons, those guys were running about probably 6:30 pace going down. That doesn't really feel like it in the film. It feels a little bit slower, but it was probably about 6:30 pace. And I
Wow.
followed all the way down that canyon. And I actually was having to change tapes while, so I'm like, have like the tape box in my mouth. I'm like unwrapping it. I'm like, pulling it out as I'm running and dodging rocks and like sticking the tape back in. But yeah, it was a totally different era of technological filmmaking. But then there's this other component of really like diving into storytelling. And you know, there's I think there's in the past before that, I think there was a lot of emphasis on just the visuals and maybe, maybe just showing the race, but not like really actually developing the characters. I actually wrote a script for it, and it's called an ensemble script essentially, and it's really akin to like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie like Saving Private Ryan. It's like
Mm.
a multi-protagonist story where you have five or six protagonists, and they all kind of have their own story, but they're all kind of interweaved.
Mm.
That was really the model that I followed for this, and I actually wrote like a kind of a and this is after we filmed the race, but I wrote a character line and like a 3-act structure for each character so that we were making sure that we're like developing their characters, we're developing their kind of their inciting or motivating moment, like what's their inciting motivation moment. We're documenting their kind of their struggle, which
Mm.
is the second act of each character, and then the final like resolution or like you know wrapping up of their individual story. And so as I was making the film, I was really kind of using that roadmap to tell the story. So,
Mm.
but I think some people, some people don't get like they say, oh, there's too much footage in the beginning of just like the pre-race stuff like that. But I actually put a lot of that back in there intentionally because there's all these like little intricate moments where like Jeff's or like Tony's meeting Jeff for the first time. And there's this little
It's
like
really
awkwardness.
awkward.
Yeah, a little awkwardness where it's like they're kind of like competitors. And they're both kind of like, looking at their feet and kicking
Yeah.
kicking around. And,
Mm.
and Tony's forgetting to introduce Jenny, their friend, and then there's a moment later where they're talking about like the snow and what their pace is going to be, and they're kind of like, you know, talking crap about like, oh yeah, Killian's going to go out too hard, or I don't know, just these little tiny things that like builds up the individual characters and their mindsets. It kind of does delay the start of the film, but later on, then you start to care about the characters more, and it's not just like a thrill movie or like a who won the race. It's like you actually care about the people that are running the race. So
Did
yeah.
did you sort of struggle with the structure of the film? Like, yeah, I know obviously it's easy to look back on it and go, this is how I made the film. But did you sort of go backwards and forwards on how you were going to structure it, or did you have that sort of set plan of how you were going to structure it?
I wouldn't say I went back and forth. I think the things that came in later though was the Gordy component. Um, that part was a late addition, I would say, but I think that was really important to kind of like show the origins of the sport, but also like kind of mirroring like his initial journey with this journey that these athletes were now encountering, but also showing how far things had come simultaneously. So that part of it was an addition. And then I would say I did do an early cut for us just because I was trying to beat the Sundance deadline or like a film festival deadline, and it wasn't as much character driven. It was more just like race story driven, and it was kind of a soulless film, honestly, at that point. And so I'm really glad that I spent the extra time to work back in the backstories and the character development and those sort of things. So yeah, there was some evolution, but I knew like once I had filmed the race and like how it unfolded, that there was a way to tell the story. I just didn't quite know how it was all going to come together in the final cut. So
Yeah. Just going back to the music component, you touched on the M83 track, and that song always gets me. And I don't know what it is. Even now, you hear it now, like sort of recycled on people use it on Instagram Reels and things, don't they? And
yeah,
that every time I hear that song. it brings back a wave of emotion, and not sure where that comes from. I'm not sure. Was that something? Is that the
Well,
reason why you picked that song?
yeah, yeah. Like kind of like I was saying earlier, I mean, it's almost it really resonates the feeling that you actually do have as you're approaching the finish line of a race after you've been through this tremendous journey of ups and downs, and you've spent these months and months training, and like you set this goal in your head, and then all of a sudden it's like the realization of this like long-term goal. And I mean, it's a hooting and hollering moment. It's one of those times where you just want to like, pump your fist in the air and shout and whatever. And so I really felt like that song uh, encapsulated that build of emotion, and then kind of like the final, release of that emotion as you cross the finish line. And I think it still resonates with that experience. So
Yeah, absolutely. Did you? I mean, you couldn't have known, but how do you feel about how iconic that film is now? And I don't know whether because you're too involved with it, whether you see it in the same way that everybody else sees it, because it is really like the touchstone of ultra running films for pretty much everyone. Even I'm in the UK, and it's still the film that everybody talks about connected with ultra running. Were you when you made it? Were you aware of how? I don't suppose you could have been, but did you have a strong feeling about the film and how successful it was going to be?
I mean, not initially, but I did feel like I had accomplished what I wanted to. And as I think remember at the premiere was in San Francisco at the North Face Endurance Challenge, and everyone stood up with a standing ovation. And then at the Q&A, they were asking me like, "Why did you want to make this film?" I said, "I just wanted to make a film that I wanted to see." And I felt like that I was happy with the end product because it's something that if I was seeking out a film, I would want to see. And so just from that standpoint, I knew that it would probably resonate with people. And then it carried on from there. And the fact, during COVID, I was trying to, um, you know, try to pump everybody up because it was a tough time for everybody. So I released the film kind of for free on YouTube, and I wasn't expecting it to, get over 2 million views, but I'm glad that it was out in a format that people could actually enjoy it and see it and be motivated by it. So yeah, I'm thrilled that that's still of interest to people, and yeah, I hope that it'll continue to inspire people in the future as well.
Mm.
So
Yeah, absolutely. So in view of how iconic the film is and how everyone, loves that film so much, when there was obviously talk of an Unbreakable 2, and I mean, obviously you don't have to go into detail about things that you don't want to talk about with that, but like there was almost like a collective like yes like went up around the world for like of trail runners and ultra runners of like yes it's going to happen. So how did that the idea for that for this year come about? And obviously it's not happening now, but if whatever you can sort of say that that you're comfortable sort of talking about how that project sort of was going to come around and how it's not now sort of thing.
yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I kind of got wind of just how competitive the field was shaping up to be, and somebody had like messaged me saying, "Hey, you should consider making a film this year." And so the idea was kind of going around in my head. I think it was like late last year, and then all of a sudden, I think it was, I don't know, it was probably February or March. I think Dylan Bowman from Free Trail reached out to me, and he said, "Hey, this is shaping up to be kind of an epic year. It's the 15-year anniversary. We're doing the Trail Con. We'd like to do like a kind of Unbreakable retrospective at Trail Con. And, what do you think about like either licensing Unbreakable for us to make a film, or, working on another project?" And I kind of, got excited about the idea. Obviously it was cool that Killian was coming back because he's, obviously in the original film, and then had some experience or some opportunities to meet like Jim Walmsley. He's married to a friend of mine. And so yeah, I was intrigued about the process, though, I'm a little more removed from the ultra running scene right now than I was. I was very heavily embedded with it for about 20 years. But the last few years, with kids and work and life, been a little more removed from it. So I was excited to kind of get back in there. Um, we, my stipulations with making the film were, I was not gonna like self-fund it and like do it on a shoestring budget like I had always done. And I think people don't appreciate like how much time these things take and how much they cost to
Mm.
make. It's a pretty decent investment, but there's a lot more dollars in the sport these days. So Dylan, with his connections, was feeling like we could get some sponsorship, and we did actually have some money that was set aside. We were going to shoot it in two, or like fund it in two phases. Phase one was like film the race, because I've filmed 20, 30, 40 races over my lifetime. And I didn't even mention this, but I had already filmed Western States 4 or 5 years before I filmed Unbreakable, which kind of led to me understanding how to actually shoot the film properly. And this kind of leads into, I'd say, the second component, which was, I don't want to say it was something that like led to the demise of Unbreakable 2, but it definitely gave pause, which was the kind of the movement of like, why aren't you focusing on the women's race? And I'm not sure how aware everyone is of that, but there was kind of a little bit of a backlash, like, hey, why aren't you focusing on the women's race? And it was never really meant to focus on the men's race.
Mm.
Our goal was just to film the race, the front runners, the fast, just filming the fast runners. And had Courtney Dauwalter, someone been, Courtney Dauwalter's finished in the top 4 or 5 overall before, she would definitely been in the race. So we weren't
Mm.
saying that we were going to like exclude women from the race, but we were just definitely leaning towards following the front of the race. And that comes from a resources standpoint. Like, we
Mm.
had 10 cameramen on the original Unbreakable. We were thinking we were going to need about 15 on the next Unbreakable. That's travel, hotels, camera equipment. I mean, you're
It's a
like,
lot.
a
Yeah.
shoestring budget's $60,000 for a 3-day shoot, like minimum. So we were just trying to contemplate how we were going to do that. And the other thing I'd learned over the years prior to filming Unbreakable is that if you try to film everything, you really film nothing. Because
Mm.
what happens, you end up with 5 shots of 50 people throughout the day instead of 50 shots of 5 people throughout the day. And I had filmed several years before, and there was no way to make a cohesive story when you're trying to film, too many groups of people that have different paces, because your camera crews spread too far out across the course, time wise. And the year that we did film Unbreakable, I think the first place woman, Tracy, was like at 19 hours, which is, that was 5 hours behind the men. So there was no way to have a crew like, I mean, we did get shots of her and we have her crossing the finish line, but we couldn't follow like the women's race
Mm.
specifically. So anyway, that was a little bit of a consideration for Hoka in their funding, but the biggest thing really just came down to, obviously, their athletes. They had several athletes that were, in the going to be in the film, and then several of them, or actually 2 of them, dropped out, and
Yeah.
so they weren't really willing to put up the money for filming other other athletes that weren't part of their
Yeah,
crew.
that
So
makes sense.
there's a combination of money. My time is very spread thin. I have 2 kids. They're both in competitive football, soccer. We travel every weekend. They're both in tournaments. We're all over the place. I'm lucky to just get in regular training runs, and then I also now use my marketing and video to sell luxury real estate here in the Reno and Lake Tahoe area, which is a 7-day-a-week job. So yeah, it's just, my time was spread thin. I didn't really have the bandwidth to kind of fight to put together the race, or the film, without the funding, and we also didn't really want to like cause any controversy or anything. That wasn't our
Mm.
intention.
Mm.
So yeah, it was just kind of a perfect storm of things that happened, but I think it was all meant to be. It's not to say that something wouldn't happen in the future, but this year
Yeah.
is not possible.
It might
But
it
I
might
think
be that it might be, sorry to interrupt you. It might be that it happened. You might look back on this and think it was probably a bit of fate that it didn't happen this year, because
absolutely.
I know, and I did hear rumors that, you mentioned about the not focusing on the women's race, but I've heard that someone's actually making a film about the women's race, aren't they, this year?
Yes.
So that
And we
is
actually
getting.
were we actually were kind of, I won't say instrumental in that, but so Hoka is actually doing that, and that was kind of part of our strategy, is like, well, we can't like do everything with Unbreakable. But if Hoka's going to also be sponsoring this separate film that's focused on the women, then we feel like we're still kind of collectively working to create content that, kind of showcases every area that we need to.
Mm.
So thankfully, yeah, the women's film is still going forward, and that's phenomenal. And I hope that goes well.
Yeah.
And yeah, who knows? Maybe there'll be a future opportunity for a sequel, or maybe another film that I'll get involved in.
Yeah.
But it would have to be like something that had some resources behind it, because I personally don't have the time and resources to self-fund these things like I used to. So
Yeah. 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 It's different when you got a family. So I suppose just thinking forward then, I mean, this happens with Western states. So you get people that are going there for the first time to race. They're viewed as being people that will potentially do well. It might turn out that they don't do as well as they hope to, but they're still in the top 10. So that means that next year they come back. So we could end up with next year being more of a stacked field in the top 10 anyway, especially if Jim and Hayden Hawks come back next year. So it might be that things work out for the best, that the women's race gets filmed this year and that's focused on quite rightly. And then next year or whenever it happens, the focus can then go back. Because I don't even think that, as much as we all appreciate all the focus that is being put on women's ultra running, I think even the women themselves would be quite happy because they understand Unbreakable as a film, and I don't think even I can't say I know there's obviously going to some people that would kick up a fuss, but all the sort of diehard ultra runner women out there, I don't think that they would feel any animosity towards a film being made about the front men like Unbreakable, like the original Unbreakable was made. So I I think things will work out for the best anyway. Is that how you feel?
yeah, I agree. And I do want to say this is probably not known, but after Unbreakable, I spent about 5 years actually trying to make a women's film, because my wife, as I said, was very invested in the women's film. I probably filmed 20 to 30 races over the course of 5 years that was solely focused on women. I filmed Darcy, he used to be Darcy Africa, but Darcy Piquio at Hard Rock, winning that race. I did some stuff with Jen Shelton. Filmed. Well, I filmed. I think it was 2011 or might have been 12. I followed the women at Western States when the course record was broken. So I actually have this huge archive of footage. But the problem, as I mentioned earlier, is you can film a race, but a lot a lot of times nothing like
Nothing comes.
extremely noteworthy or exciting happens, because the front runner's 2 hours ahead of the next
Mhm.
person, and it's a little harder to make a exciting emotional movie when there's when it's just a blowout. And that could have happened this year very easily, which is why we were going to phase out the project and only film the race first and kind of see how it unfolded, and then after it was done, then decide if we were going to invest the rest of the money to edit it. But yeah, who knows? Maybe a future with the right like funding. I have an archive of amazing footage. I could almost make a retrospective. I was actually working with Ann Trayson. I got all of her like historic footage in my studio, like as we speak, on old beta tapes that we were pulling. Billy Yang and I were talking about making a almost what was that skateboard Dogtown Z
Yes, yeah,
Boys, like
Dogtown,
like
yeah, Dog, yeah, I
like
don't
one of those
know what,
like kind of
yeah,
historic, like with the roots of ultra
yeah,
running. We were started working on something like that. So, and there was a heavy focus on women in that too. So, I just do want to say, like, I mean, my wife's an amazing athlete, and I don't take anything away from the women's sport. I just think that you have to just focus on the project that you're doing at any given time, and just give that the effort. And if you try to do too much and cover too much, then you don't really have it's just too wide breadth. There's no like
yeah,
focus. So
yeah,
so yeah, who knows? Maybe future women's film, maybe a future Unbreakable. But I either way, I do care about the sport and want to just
yeah.
showcase and support the athletes. So
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? When you're involved with, I feel this as well, sort of in ultra running media per se. Sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So, I've over the years sort of tried to not give any sort of too much focus on men or women with interviews and things. And then I've had sort of I've had people like women criticize me for not interviewing enough women, but then they're just like taking like a snapshot of interviews I'd done recently, and I'm trying to get them to go back and look at all the interviews that I started with, and it's hard, in the era that we're in now, with like kind of everything has to be snappy and quick, that someone can sort of get a snapshot of something that projects that you've done and sort of take it for sort of face value rather than digging into, your history and knowing the sort of thing that you've done to support the sport. So people, if people had heard that rumor that people had said that Unbreakable 2 wasn't going to be about the women, they could have, you could have got all sorts of, attacks online from people saying that, but they wouldn't have known those 5 years that you spent filming women's races. And that's the kind of thing that we're up against now, aren't we? Did you worry about releasing a film now in the sort of climate we're in now? Would that be a concern to you because obviously when you released Unbreakable back in 2011, social media wasn't a massive thing, was it?
Yeah, not as much. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'd say the majority of the people, men and women, were excited about Unbreakable too, but there was definitely kind of an undercurrent of negativity about, not focusing on the women. And I understand that from the trailer perspective. And we probably shouldn't have even done the little teaser. It was just, honestly, that was just done to see if there was enough interest to gather a sponsor to try to get the funding. If it had been the old era, I didn't announce that I mean, I had already been filming Western states every year for 5 years before that. So, nobody knew that what we were up to, but we just were there. So it's a little different, I think, like announcing a film in advance. But at the same time, I don't know how else you kind of get funding for it. So,
Yes.
um, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it progresses. But like I said, like I wasn't gonna like if there had happened to been like some women in the top 10, I would have absolutely like filmed them. It's just more of like a timing thing. Like if some women started breaking into the top 10, top 5, they would have absolutely been in that film. And then I would have followed up with them and, went and did their backstory and done all that with them. So there was definitely not any exclusion, but the main point was just to focus on the front of the race and see if there was any course records going down. Um, and yeah, so we'll see. But if there is anyone out there that wants to, fund an Unbreakable, just solely about women, I'm happy to do that too. We just, I don't have the bandwidth and resources on my own, but happy to
Mm.
collaborate and work on any projects. Honestly, it just has to be the right setup. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So moving away from the controversial side of things, what's your sort of take on the way that the filmmaking has gone, like with technology? Obviously, Unbreakable, the original film, there was like you say, there's no drones, no high-tech gimbals. How would you sort of approach if when you do go back and do Unbreakable 2, how will you approach it with, how many cameramen we have? You had 10 before, multiple drones. And that sort of, had you sat down and started to look at logistics in that way?
Yeah, yeah. I actually hired a what's called a line producer for Unbreakable 2 because I just didn't have the time. They're the one that coordinates basically all the hotels, food, where people need to be. They hire all the cameramen. They just basically do all the organizing of everything and the budget and paying everybody. And yeah, we had laid out actually. I think we were going to have two drone operators, and then we were hiring all these like high end, like modern adventure filmmakers. And I would have probably considered myself an additional cameraman, on this new film versus the other one. I was the main cameraman. Because I mean, I have my own drones now and own gimbals and things like that. But these high end like adventure film photographers and guys that do it now, they're just like super good. I mean, these guys can fly drones between trees, following mountain bikers. They can, just get these phenomenal shots that were not at all possible back when I made Unbreakable. So yeah, the plan was to like really rely heavily on, I was looking at myself as more of the storyteller and less of the
Mm.
visual guy. And we were going to hire some really high end cameramen for the project. So that's how I would approach it, probably moving forward as well. I'm a little more removed from the actual, technical process of filming these days. I mean, I have a guy that works with me and helps me shoot all my, Tahoe lakefront properties and does drones and stuff. I personally know how to do it, but I'm a little more removed from it currently. So, but yeah, and story part, that would have been in my wheelhouse, and the editing would have been in my wheelhouse. But I would have hired some real good camera guys for sure.
There's plenty of them about, that's for sure.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. There's some great content out there. Even just the stuff that people just put out now on just the like their own reels for Instagram, like using drones and stuff for that is like, yeah, it's amazing. So there'd be no shortage of people that would want to sort of get involved, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so how was sort of life changed for you over these years then? So before we were recording, you were sort of mentioning how things had changed for you in your day-to-day life. You sort of were very involved with ultra running, being an ultra runner yourself and your wife being an ultra runner and racing and everything. And then you've kind of sort
Mhm.
of not drifted away from ultra running, but sort of removed yourself because of other responsibilities and life situations. So just talk about that and how things have changed for you.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's kind of a long story, but we all kind of have to evolve, and there's a start and an end of everything, I guess. But um, my career and my athletic endeavors and my wife's athletic endeavors were all very ultra running centric from 2003 until 2000. Well, I mean, realistically, probably just until about 2 years ago. But there was a really pivotal point that I would say kind of marked the end of the real ultra centric life. And that was in 2015. My daughter was 4 at the time. We had just had my son. This was right after we made the long haul film with the North Face. My daughter contracted severe pneumonia. We didn't really know that she had pneumonia because it was kind of not exhibiting for like a month or so. And so by the time we found out, she ended up in ICU, had to like have surgery, had to have her lung drained, almost didn't make it. So we were there for 2 weeks in the hospital. And during that time, I actually had I was making a trail running series called Trail Life. So I had hired several really good adventure filmmakers, and they were working in my studio. I had a studio in Reno, and we were doing a lot of ultra running content. But the funding was really driven from me, like going out and finding the sponsorships and finding the clients that we need to do. And because of this sickness with my daughter, I wasn't able to find the money. Kind of ran out of money. Had to like lay off 7 employees at my studio, and then while we kind of recovered from that. And then like right after that, my wife lost her job in a layoff. She was doing like medical sales. And and then like right after that, my brother-in-law passed away. He was an athlete, a football player, like American football player, passed away in a prescription drug overdose from pain medications related to his back injury from football. And he was only 33 years old. And then that kind of ended up getting wrapped up into a criminal trial. So we were, getting contacted by, National Enquirer and all these like magazines that wanted to do all these, rag stories about what had happened, and
Mm.
ended up in a court trial. And yeah, it was just a super stressful time. And so we kind of pulled the plug on reality for a little while. We jumped in our camper van or camper trailer, and we took our 18-month-old son and 4, or I guess 5-year-old daughter, and we took off to Alaska, and we went and hung out with Jeff Rose, Jen Shelton, Ricky Gates. We just were up in Alaska kind of running in the mountains. My wife did the what's that race, the Rose Pass crossing race. Her and I both ran the Chillicoot Trail up in Skagway, the 35 mile historic trail. I think she set the course record on that too while we were doing that. But we just camped out for like 4 months in Alaska and just kind of like escaped everything. It was kind of a mix of like ultra running and simple living. My wife is still really heavy into running too. We flew back and she ran Leadville, and I think she got third place at Leadville
Wow.
that year. Um, but yeah, it was just I guess we were still focused on ultra running, but obviously when we came back from that, we had no income, no jobs. The studio was kind of shuttered. You know, we didn't have a crew to like produce content anymore, and then so we were just trying to figure out how we were going to support ourselves. And another ultra running friend of mine owned a real estate brokerage called Tahoe Mountain Realty up in Lake Tahoe, and he said, "Hey, why don't you kind of like use your filmmaking and you know your film production, and you can come sell real estate and you'll do pretty well." So I kind of like followed that path, got licensed to sell real estate, and yeah, just kind of used my media production and film to like really present these properties in a really nice way. And yeah, we Jen and I both dove into that career, but it was good, but it was all consuming. Slowly, you know, kind of killed the ultra running ability because it's such a client driven business where you're getting called at any random hour. So I remember in our early phases, Jen, my wife, was like on, you know, 3 or 4 hour training runs trying to train for 100 miler, and we get a call and she'd have to like run off the trail, go jump in a car and like drive and go show a property or something. And eventually it kind of just like killed the consistency of our ultra running. And then yeah, so we just kind of had to reinvent ourselves. And my wife continued to try to do ultra running up until I guess it was like a year and a half ago. She tried to run she actually she won a 50K here in Tahoe. She won the Ray Miller 50 miler, or Sean O'Brien 50 miler. And then she was trying to do canyons to qualify for UTMB 100 miler, but her knee gave out at like mile 50, and they said it was just bone on bone. And so that was last race essentially. She was pretty bummed because she had some goals, but you know, I don't know. We were just still trying to hang on to ultra running, but it's become much more difficult in the last few years. And then my ultra running's kind of, you know, faded into just getting out and doing my own little adventure runs here and there. But yeah, it's you know, things change, life evolves. But I feel like we're in a good place. You know, our family's in a good place. We've really kind of dove into kind of some back into our faith with the Catholic Church, and that's really been rewarding. And you know, there is a story about that. Maybe you can share the article in your show notes or something. But actually had a kind of a spiritual reawakening during my last attempt at 100 miler, which was the Wasatch 100 miler, and just this crazy experience that happened that kind of like opened my eyes to like kind of a greater
What
life
actually happened with
experience.
that? Do you mind talking about it? What actually happened?
Well, this was kind of in the midst of all this craziness with reinventing our lives in real estate and kind of feeling like we were losing our identity in a way of the ultra running. And so I wasn't like physically super prepared to go run Wasatch. Normally my wife and I would support each other. We'd crew each other. We would pace each other at these 100 milers and these different races. But she was so wrapped up in work and like raising the kids that I had to like drive all the way out there on my own. So I'm underprepared, all alone, no crew, no support, nothing, just by myself on this 100 miler. And something just happened during that race where I was just feeling this like kind of sense of being overwhelmed and also like underprepared. So I kind of just started like praying during the middle of this race, but I kept praying, kept praying, kept praying. And it was just like this weird spiritual experience. I don't know why I was praying so much, but literally like every mile I was like praying, you know, for people in my life and trying to like, I don't know, just it was kind of a bit of a gratitude experience, but also I don't know why, but it just anyway, after that experience, it exposed all of this kind of selfishness and kind of I don't know. I just kind of realized like I was really living a little bit of a shallow life and not kind of giving my priorities to the right things like my family and like friends and loved ones, and just kind of like giving myself in that way. And it was very closed in. It was about being scared and finances and like how much can you work, and you have to like do something in life and be successful and make that big huge movie and make everything good in order to like live a fulfilling life. And I just kind of had this realization I was really focused on the wrong things. And I started focusing more on like relationships and like trying to like actively like love my family, love my friends, love my clients, just like really try to be like a better person. And it would just really like open up this whole new perspective on life. I realized my priorities were really out of whack. We have things that we say are our priorities, but when you actually look at your to-do list on a daily basis, are those things actually in order of priority? So I actually started making my to-do list in order of priority. So in the morning, I have these little categories that start with my highest priority and go down. And I put my to-do list in there so that I know that I'm actively doing things each day that are in alignment with what I'm saying are my priorities, rather than just saying these things are my priorities, but doing a bunch of different things. And that like just completely flipped my life around. And I've scrapped a ton of like things I would consider vices and, things that society would probably consider, not things you want to be associated with your life. And yeah, it's just been a whole transformation, and feel a lot more like purpose. And yeah, and I still enjoy running and being fit, but it's not like the number one thing in my
Mm.
life. Yeah, but it taught me a lot though. It taught me a lot about the importance of like suffering and setting goals, and how you can you know attain things, but it still has to be within the perspective of priorities of the rest of your life. So
Mm.
anyway, I know that's a long explanation, and it's kind of a strange personal experience, but
No, it's
I
I'm sure it's something that many people have had. I know obviously, running if you're running 100 miles, you'll have some unusual moments, won't you? So I'm sure you're not the first person to have a moment like that. Um,
and
how does
there's a bit of a spiritual, oh, sorry, there's
no,
a
it's
bit of
just
a
gonna,
spiritual
yeah,
component to ultra running in a way, and I think
yeah,
we all kind of tap into that.
yeah.
But I think sometimes we get a little too heavily focused on
Mm,
the event or the activity of that, rather than kind of
yeah.
taking lessons from that and applying it to the greater aspects of our life. So yeah,
Because
that's kind of what I find.
we all, because I think, obviously, I'm religious too, and we all, if you are religious, you recognize that you have a spiritual need in your life, don't you? And maybe ultra running kind of fills that need a little bit, so you get that sort of, you get that community, and you get those feelings on a run. Um, but that doesn't sort of, yeah, if your priorities are out of whack, then yeah, this an interesting thought, that to sort of sometimes you perhaps have to sort of reassess your priorities in life. And how does running sort of stack up now for you on a priority sort of level then?
So I would say, I'd say like if I was to just share my priority list, I put, my faith in God at the top, my creator. The second is health, but I wouldn't consider that like extreme running. Like I'd consider that basic fitness. Like,
Mm,
am I eating healthily? Am I getting out, for a basic run? Am I lifting? Just doing enough to just like be alive for my family essentially.
mm,
And then right underneath that's my marriage, and then right below that's my kids, and then right below that is, you know, I would say additional running or additional adventures, and then work, hopefully below that. But that's what I say are my priorities, but am I actually doing things each day?
yeah.
Like, am I actually, getting up and eating healthy and getting out on a run? Am I actually like doing something nice for my wife each day? Am I actually, spending time with my kids, or giving them my attention, or am I just diving straight into work? And it's really hard to not just dive straight into work, but I try every day to not
Mm,
do that.
yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying when you say, but priorities and work. Work for me is always the lowest priority in the day, but unfortunately, it's the thing that takes up the most time in the day, isn't it? sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Amazing. So what's your sort of plan going forward then for, and obviously there's no set like time scale for Unbreakable 2 if it happens. Are you got any other projects on the go now, or are you simply just focusing on your real estate business and then just waiting to see what happens with Unbreakable?
Yeah, that probably sounds about right. Probably just, like I said, my kids are like kind of a big priority in my life right now. So, my daughter is becoming a very competitive young soccer player. She just moved up to the highest team in our region, highest level team. She's trying to see if she can get a scholarship to maybe play in college. So we're already doing some ID camps at some different schools. So that's a high priority. I really enjoy watching them in their sport and helping them too. Jen and I have learned a lot about endurance nutrition and periodization and cooling and some of these things that we're trying to translate into the sport of soccer, football. But yeah, that's really an enjoyment for me right now is just like watching that. And as a matter of fact, I played soccer in high school and a little bit in college. Not like just club, but yeah, I've gotten back into it myself, and it's a really fun. I have a 40 plus men's team. We play indoor, and then I play on a co-ed outdoor team, and that's just a blast. It's a fun way to get out there and really, use my endurance that I've gained over all the years. I'm not very good, on the ball, but I enjoy running a lot, and that's
Chasing the
usually me.
ball.
Yeah, like how many miles can we get in during this soccer match, and that's pretty fun. And then yeah, running between that and adventures, I love I find motivation in like seeing new places. And so actually I don't know if you use Strava, but there's a
Mm,
cool heat map on Strava
yeah.
where it shows you all the places that you've run. And I look at that and I'm like, okay, this little part over here looks kind of blank. Let's go see what I can find over there. So I go and like put little routes together, like up in these new little sections of my area that I haven't been in. And I find a lot of enjoyment in doing that. Um, but actually another thing too, and my wife just pointed this out. She's like, you need to be more consistent with your running. And I said, well, I think the one thing that I've lost is I'm not doing any races. I think the last race I did was what was the race I did? Uh, I did White River 50 miler, I think just like a few years ago. That was my last ultra that I ran. And it actually went pretty well. But I think having a race on the books or having something to look forward to is much more motivating for me to like get out on a daily basis. I find when you don't have kind of a goal that it's harder to just get out and like be motivated to run. And so my wife was encouraging me to like sign up for, it doesn't need to be like a super long race, but maybe a 30K or a 50K, in the fall or something. And so I think that's probably what I'll do is just try to sign up for like some local races, occasionally. That way I can stay motivated and kind of keep getting out there, but not running to the extent where we used to, where we were running, 20 hours a week in training and, having to leave the kids and find babysitters in order to get in these 5 hour training runs and things like that. The kids are just kind of in a phase now where we don't have that much time, but yeah, I mean, if we can keep just getting outside and being healthy and hiking and backpacking and doing, outdoor stuff, I think that's going to be awesome. And yeah, maybe signing up for a race here and there. But probably no more majorly competitive ultra running for me, but just getting out there and enjoying it when I can. So
Yeah, yeah. I think we're in the same boat. Yeah. So my daughters, I've got two daughters. One's 15 and one's 13, and yeah, it's harder to leave them now. Although they don't really want me around as much as they used to. Now they're the teenagers.
exactly. But that's when you need to be there though, so they're not getting in
Yeah,
trouble.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think I'm basically just a taxi driver now for them. I just drive them around everywhere. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Full-time carpool.
The joys of being a parent.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great to talk to you. And hear your sort of backstory and everything, and dive into, you know, the most iconic ultra running film. I think that it stands the test of time, and I think it will do for a long time still. And even if you don't get to make Unbreakable to us, that I think that legacy is there for a long time. But I really do hope that you get to make Unbreakable too. It would be something great. Mm.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think things will come together if they're meant to be, and I don't want to force anything at this stage in my life, but when it's meant to be, it'll happen,
Yeah.
and I'm open and willing to do it when all the cards align. But I really appreciate you and your podcast and all the work you've done for our sport as well, and keep up the good work. And thank you for having me. And yeah, blessings. Hope everything continues to go well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, cheers. Thanks for coming on, mate, and giving up your time. It is much appreciated. Thanks. And thanks for listening and watching, everybody. Cheers. Bye 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 bye.
Cheers.